Thank you, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to speak here once again in this room. I'm addressing now the most technically advanced portion of our community. You represent the most active and the most important part of all stakeholders involved in internet governance. So very briefly, I would like to speak on the current ICANN's agenda. I hope that you view ICANN as your friend and colleague. I have been a new addition to ICANN for more than, 2 months. I have been with ICANN, so many things are new for me as well. But for this year, well, in those 2 months, many important events have taken place during those 2 months, and I want to talk to you about them and answer your questions and maybe also get some very useful feedback. Today, we will discuss very briefly the modern-day internet governance. A couple of words will be said on ICANN Corporation and its current challenges, and then we will discuss the Department of Commerce declaration and the results of the Sao Paulo Netmundial and the outcomes of this conference and what you need to know about these outcomes. If time permits, I will be able to answer your questions again. So without any further ado, internet governance. Andrei, who was introducing me, he said that my presentation here is entitled Internet Governance or Internet Use Governance. And there is the issue of terminology that must be cleared up. I will have a special slide on this. What we understand as internet governance, the definition was defined by the working group on, or by the Internet Task Force, and I will remind you that this task force was established by the General Secretary of the United Nations. It was headed by Valentin Desai, the Deputy General Secretary, in 2005. About 50 representatives of different countries made up this task force, and this task force had two objectives. First, it had to provide a definition of internet, and secondly, it had to provide the definition of internet governance. So the first objective, the work group achieved very quickly. They said that, well, you all know what internet is, so there is no sense really in drafting the definition, so we'll move on to the next issue right away. And with respect to the second word or word combination, the definition was generated. It's not optimal, but the definition speaks about the procedures, norms, rules, and principles. And it also speaks of stakeholders, multi-stakeholders, including private sector, public sector, and the civil society. So these are entities that are involved in governing the internet, and I will demonstrate later that politically, this is an important part of the definition. Now, with respect to internet governance, immediately we need to understand what multi-stakeholderism stands for, and in the task force final report, 4 organizational models of internet governance were enumerated, including various options of what and how must be done. None of these models have been adapted since then, but given the new proposals from the US government put forward in March this year, we will have to do something about that, and the position of RIPE-NCC is crucial in this respect. So going back to this issue of definitions, first of all, it's very difficult to translate that phrase. We speak 4 different languages. When we use Russian, we can use up to 4 different versions of the translation. Well, first of all, there is the English equivalent. There is TLD. We all understand what TLD stands for. We understand that there are 2 types of TLDs, top-level domains. There are about 400 of those, or maybe 500 already of those. So consequently, we, people who work and live in Russia, we use certain words in the national language. For us, TLD in Russian means домен верхнего уровня, and if we talk about generic GTLDs, we call them домен общего пользования. That's the adopted translation. And also speaking about the Russian language, there is also this official version, the official translation, which was not done by people who live in Russia and whose Russian is modern, let's put it this way. Sometimes GTLDs are not translated as домена верхнего уровня in ICANN documents. There you will find RDVO. R stands for родовой. It's not a very good choice of Russian word to translate the word generic. Apart from those translations, then there is also the legislative translation, the translation provided by the legislators, and how these words are used in laws and regulations. If we take CCTLD, for instance, CCTLD is called национальный домен первого уровня, first level national domain. National stands for country, and it doesn't say top level, but it say upper level. Well, you may think that this is not very important, but in fact, it may result in people misunderstanding each other when they use different translations. Or then there are some words that are poorly defined. Originally, the words existed in Russia, in English, and then it's very difficult to translate them into other languages. Let's take internet governance, for instance. Governance, what does it mean? What does it mean? Does it mean management of use, or regulation even? Researchers and experts show that internet governance in the English language can have at least two meanings: governance of internet and governance on internet. Stylistically, there is a difference even for the English native speakers. And then multi-stakeholderism. In Russian, we just transcribe this word. We call that multi-stakeholderный. It doesn't really mean anything, and in Russian, and then you can only explain what it means: involvement of all interested parties, which seems to be a correct version. Or recently, you find a lot of коллективное управление translations. That's the multi-stakeholderism, the principle of коллективное управление, collective management, collective governance. It may not be exactly correct, but in Russian it sounds better. And as applied to the functions that the Americans want to hand over, the ones that are named in the proposal of the 14th of March, we also find stewardship. Stewardship, even the best translators are really confused by what this word means. You talk about coordinating functions or leadership, but stewardship can be translated into Russian. There is another word, служение, which means service, and with service, serve. But in the context of the DOC, serving is not the best choice of words. The meaning may be accurate, but the style is wrong. And then sometimes in the documents that are signed, sometimes you will find multilateral approach, but it's not the same as multi-stakeholderism. When they say multilateral approach, they mean multilateral diplomacy, the approach is adopted by several countries, as opposed to unilateral declarations or bilateral agreements. So in Russian, such problems do exist. And then there is also international information security and cyber security. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the President of Russia, they all spoke on cybersecurity, and instead of using cybersecurity, in fact, they're using information security. But international documents like the Budapest Convention operates the word cybersecurity, in other words, starting with a cyber in Russian, kyber. So all of these things we have to bear in mind when we talk about internet governance. So how does one participate in internet governance? I think that you should know that because this conference is a way, one of the ways to get involved in internet governance, to participate in internet governance. There is RIPE-NCC, there is ENOG, and there are many other similar fora around the world. There are many specialized organizations, including the United Nations. There is the International Internet Governance Forum. There are national conferences and associations, and there are new ways to discuss internet governance, also like this Netmundial Congress. So the most urgent problems as viewed by ICANN are given on the slide. I don't want to focus on that. I think you're very familiar with the topic. So let's move on to ICANN. I have been with ICANN for only, 2 months. So you may be even better familiar with that issue than I. But you know me, and you know that I participated in different projects related to the study of ICANN. I was a member of the working group to review WHOIS policies, and I also worked in the working group on transparency and accountability of ICANN. And now I'm part of the organization itself. I'm inside. I'm an insider, and I kept asking myself this question. We know there are many people who are not happy with Microsoft, but still these people are not as emotional. They are not as angry when they talk about Microsoft as when they are talking about ICANN. I think there is a good explanation for this. Microsoft is a commercial company, and their main business is profits, and their business case is all about profits, and they exist in a competitive field. And if you don't like Microsoft's products, you can always switch to a different platform or a different product. There is no need to criticize corporate governance in a company whose product you dislike. I mean, there is always a choice. You can always switch to a different platform product. But in case of ICANN, this corporation was originally established as a public interest corporation. It is a legal entity. It is a very peculiar kind of legal entity. Russian legislation doesn't know this kind of legal entity. It only exists in the United States of America and other countries of Anglo-Saxon law. It was established in California, where it was possible to organize a company in accordance with that principle. Since this is a public corporation, there are principles that apply to the governance and structure of this organization. Anyone can participate in governing ICANN, any of us, but the idea is that all decisions must be taken in the most transparent fashion, and that the number of people dissatisfied with this or that decision would be minimal, and that everybody at least felt like his or her voice was heard and the arguments were heard, and there is good reasoning behind every decision. So my objective when I talk about ICANN, when I speak on behalf of this organization, my objective, well, it's not really to show, well, how shall I put it better?
I'm showing not why you need to agree with the decisions they make, because there's no unanimous decision, because there are always some unhappy participants, but you just need to explain and provide some reasoning why this or that decision was made, and why some of the arguments had been rejected and the others were accepted, helping us to modify the decision making. And this decision making process implies that we involve many experts involvement, and the Russia's voice, yes, it has not been that powerful yet, but we need to do everything we can so that the authority of the Russian participants, Russian members, and Russia as a country be more powerful and respected in terms of expressing its ideas and thoughts. Some people say that ICANN has been controlled by the United States of America and that's it, which is not true. Its HQ is in California, that's it. And as far as the other links are concerned, there are not too many of them existing. And I actually report directly to the to an English-speaking person from England. My colleagues operate in different countries worldwide, so you can speak for a long time about this topic. We are very open and transparent. We have nothing to hide. What are the relevant problems for ICANN? The Ministry of Trade, the US Ministry of Trade announcement and statement was the main problem. ICANN has spent a lot of effort launching and developing the new TLDs, and we've been all involved in this process. IPv4 and IPv6 program is the thing your organization is working on. And the last two topics that I was touching upon is providing transparency and accountability in ICANN's activities to avoid all suspicions, to take everyone's opinion into account. And one of the topics which was actually voiced in Durban session is the new who is. It still proves that there are so many questions and yet not too many answers. But new who is, if you have read the Durban's documents, know what radical and fundamental changes had been offered there. To make it short with ICANN, to cut a long story short, please use this URL, check our website, it's a new one. We hope that it will be translated into all the UN languages, including Russian. Everything will be translated into 6 languages on the site. There have been a lot of updates. We wonder what you think about this site and address its strong and weak points. Now I would like to speak about the statement made by NTIA, National Telecommunication Administration of the Department of Trade of the United States of America. In March 2014, NTIA declared that the coordination functions for the internet domain names stewardship would be given to the global community of the stakeholders, i.e. global multi-stakeholders community. So far it's not been done, and that's been the main argument for considering ICANN the organization controlled by the American government. There is a striving desire to get rid of that attitude and make sure that people do not think of ICANN as the US-controlled organization. As one of the first steps, NTIA asked ICANN to get the multi-stakeholders together and work out their proposals on how it should be done. And currently IANA, Internet Assigned Number Authority, is part of ICANN, but it's a separate part. It's a standalone part, and I work in ICANN. I cannot physically be where IANA works and cannot be connected to its to its network, which provides a high level of internet security, information security. IANA takes technical functions, servicing and maintaining the root file and operating with updates and changes. The new domains launches stem into dozens and dozens of thousands of updates, and with the new requests there'll be more thousands per day added, so it's a serious work going on. And the final word belongs to NTIA so far. NTIA wanted to drop this function. IANA is in charge of providing the who is availability of the root and supports IPv4 and IPv6 address space of the autonomous systems and the delegation of the blocks of the addresses to RIPE, NCC and other registries, and it gives unique values to different parameters related to the internet functioning. in accordance and approved by IETF. IANA is still a top-level registry for two traditional domain, .int, which belongs to the international organizations, .int, a few hundreds of domains, and .apra, which dates back to the actual Opera existing and actively promoting and developing the internet. What were the principles of passing the responsibility and authority? There are four of these bullet points. First of all, it's the support of the model involving all of the stakeholders. Otherwise, there would not be any preference given to any of those. We'll speak about these multi-stakeholders a little later. And it follows by the stability and reliability and fault tolerance of DNS. Security, stability, resilience, in other words, three magic words that we use, providing the stable functioning of the DNS. Then we meet the expectations of the stakeholders, because the main stakeholders are the states and the governments. That's why we cannot actually we need to make sure that these expectations are met, their expectations are met. And one very important principle is the internet transparency. There are no changes given to the root zone, bringing I'm sorry? There should not be any violations here as far as the openness and transparency of the internet are concerned. ITIA roles and functions are quite limited in terms of managing the internet. First of all, it takes the functions of IANA, working with ICANN. Then it brings changes to the main file of the root zone. Thirdly, NTIA has an agreement working with VeriSign, the VeriSign company, and it's done technically by VeriSign. These three bullet points can be changed and updated as agreed by the stakeholders in the future, but NTIA does not initialize the changes of the file and does not perform any activities on its own. It does not evaluate the changes of the file of the root zone. It just checks and verifies whether the procedures have been met and done correctly. And the final thing that should be addressed here, NTIA does not have the defining role for stewardship of DNS stewardship. That announcement for the 14th of March 2014 does not relate to the any changes of the stewardship, and it should be discussed separately. The role of others does not change. Everything which relates to RIPE NCC function and all the other regional organizations, ICANN minus IANA, they have no changes, at least in the near future. NTIA does not perform the direct functions of IANA, it just performs the controlling and monitoring function. Therefore, it's not the part of the statement, and the IANA's functions do not relate to the items that are not of their competence. Data protection, cyber security, data filtering, personal data protection do not relate to the immediate functions of IANA. So we speak about a very focused set of items, root functions of the internet, but very focused ones and no other ones. The scope of changes is pretty limited. And one final thing I would like to point out is, speaking about the global summit of the global internet governance, which was held in Sao Paulo in Brazil in April 2014. It was 1 month ago. It was created by the Edward Snowden's disclosures about the bugging of the telephone lines and eavesdropping of the heads of states and governments, and it was very emotionally accepted by two powerful ladies in Europe and Latin America, the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, and Angela Merkel, the chancellor from Germany. They had initiated the draft resolutions to the UN General Assembly as a platform for discussing the mechanisms to avoid such unpleasant outcomes in the future. It was suggested to summon the global summit in April and invite all of the stakeholders there and develop a paper, an official document expressing the consensus, the general consensus, in terms of what should be done to avoid the announcement and disclosures similar to Snowden's, and what should be done to maintain these general principles in the near future. 97 countries representatives were involved, 1,500 representatives. Russian delegation was headed by the Ministry of Communications, Mr. Nikiforov, and recently in Brazil they had adopted a law on general principles related to the rules and the rights of the internet users. It was unprecedented. It was describing the legislators take point, and it's called Marco Civil. And it starts with providing the freedom of information sharing and all the other human rights that should be granted and guaranteed in the cyberspace. Netmundial multi-stakeholder statement was adopted. As a result, you can follow that link, that URL, to actually familiarize yourselves with the general principles of that document. I cannot find the official translation in Russian, but it's quite straightforward in English. I wouldn't want to comment in detail, but I would just like to draw your attention to the actual differences this document brings, unlike all the other documents that had been created a little earlier. Before Netmundial, it was the Tunis agenda, the summit on the information community, a series of conferences which started in Geneva, followed in Tunisia, and next year there will be another one, and representatives of different states expressed their views on internet governance. Before Netmundial, it was also expressed publicly by different states representatives. And what's the main difference between what we used to have before Tunis 2005 and Sao Paulo 2014? You can see the differences on this slide. When we speak about internet governance, in the year 2005, people spoke about international management of the internet, and they spoke about internet governance and administration. In other words, the governance in internet governance was was studied in Sao Paulo, whether it was governance of the internet or governance on the internet. But it was management in Tunis, and it was supposed to be multilateral, involving a lot of states in this process. In Sao Paulo, 9 years after, they spoke about multi-stakeholders without mentioning the multilateral international cooperation principles. The civil society, the private sector were mentioned previously, but it also stipulates the international organizations in Tunis. In Sao Paulo, they chose a different way. International organizations were not mentioned, but they added 3 more groups: the technical community, the academic community, and the users of the internet. Currently, there is a general consensus, meaning that there are 6 stakeholders: the governance, private sector, civil society, technical community, which does not relate to neither of the aforementioned ones, the academic community, and the users community. Radical changes, I think, have been introduced. And as far as the importance of the governmental part is concerned, the Tunis meeting saw the mentioning of the sovereign rights of states as far as the internet policies were concerned. For Sao Paulo meeting, we saw the more flexible manner with reference to the issue under discussion. We see that they had softened their stance and position, and it was done by the states involved in that process. That Netmundial document had not been supported by 3 countries. India, that announced that the document stipulates things that should be approved by the Indian community. It was not supported by Cuba, which claims that the Sao Paulo principles do not align with the Tunis statements, and it was not supported by the Russian Federation. There were a few statements made related to that, and people say that Russia's point of view was not taken into account. Netmundial would be changing the rules and the principles of creating the documentation, and if you take a look at the documents signed and created in Sao Paulo, they prove that the secret services of the internet traffic exchanges have the right of analyzing international traffic, and it would increase the digital divide between the developed economies and the emerging economies. Russia would disagree with such principles and will not consider this Netmundial in the future. I'm showing here the link, which is the source, but I would like you to vote. Those of you who were familiar, who were actually familiar with the Russian position. Were you aware of the position of the Russian Federation? Where did you read this? I would like to ask you a question, because the Russian position was actually created during the course of the conference, because it basically proves that Russia had rejected all those principles, and all of you who were involved in discussions can explain their colleagues why you consider these principles wrong. If you did not read about such things, it again proves that it's not necessarily that the Russian state takes into account the actual interests of the internet community in Russia. And finishing my presentation, as far as the internet governance is concerned, I already said that there is a number of issues and items which we have been addressing closely, and we hope a lot of work expects us. Just one final item I would like to address. There have been more announcements and statements made as far as the international universal agreement on internet governance is concerned, and I think it's a good platform, such universal agreement on internet governance. We need to move towards it to align the different principles of different stakeholders, and we'll be able to shed more light on it and find the way to express our thoughts and ideas. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Микрофон не...
My name is Dmitry Burkov. Mikhail, first of all, I would like to congratulate you on being appointed Vice President of ICANN, because it's for the first time I see that Vice President of ICANN is made good use of. And that's it, basically. Because I actually regret you leaving on a road show, and you'll do the same thing in St. Pete, avoiding our discussions here tomorrow. So I have a couple of questions for you. The first question, why does ICANN need us? Why does ICANN need us? Dmitry, who do you mean by saying us? The technical community, etc. The actual principle that we address support organization is a very artificial creation. Just be realistic. Why do you think they still try to get us involved? The NTIA situation, and they involved the Congress and the Senate of the United States. And the facts that became obvious last week, and they will be part of the national security policy of the United States, and the activities of all of the governments could be described as, DDoS activity. And what we do against these DDoS activities is the mitigation of such DDoS activities. Because all these words that are related to the preparation of the Netmundial, multi-stakeholderism, that was a very pointless declaration. Everyone keeps speculating about those principles, but they are very vague. So please be more exact, because you cannot keep on going and keep on speaking the diplomatic language. Just be more precise. Can I interrupt you and let Mikhail answer this question? Why does ICANN need us? And maybe come up with some objections against that principle that ICANN don't need us. Thank you. It's real simple as regards the first part of your question. Why does ICANN need us? In the community, there are some people expressing a very negative reaction, like you are doing, Dmitry. And if it's leading us to a conflict, it's better that we negotiate and parley than end up in a conflict. So why do we all need to think that ICANN needs us? We need to be heard. And that's why we need ICANN. We are all the internet users. And the internet is developing rapidly. 10 years ago, I had got used to 200 country domains, and I thought it was an ingenious solution. There was a good number of domains sufficient. But what's happening today is radically changing the importance of the domains, because we go back to the IP addresses as the main foundation for the search of the information on the internet, going through the filters in different countries. In order to make sure that every opinion is heard, we need information from you, and that's why ICANN needs you. Why does ICANN need you, Dmitry? May I take this question, by the way? Maybe in the United States of America, which we don't really like, and in Europe, which we don't really like either, the decision making is done differently. They just need to ask the opinions of all of the stakeholders. That's their main principle. And maybe on the next day, RIPE will explain us how we can actually influence the transitions and things. The same applies to ICANN. the opinions are taken care of and being listened and heard. It's not the organization that suits the interests of just one group of people. It takes into account the interests of multiple stakeholders. First of all, my quick comment on Netmundial, but I may, of course, skip this because it takes some time. It's okay, take your time. If we take a look at this formally, it was very impressive. Formally, it was very impressive. Without any mandate, it gathered representatives of different countries. The states were represented, and over the course of 2 days, there were a lot of very rational and very qualified statements, if I can put it this way. There were a lot of people trying to express their ideas. Mikhail, how many suggestions generated were actually considered in the resulting paper, in percent? I was not involved in Netmundial, so you don't know. But sorry to interrupt. All those inputs that were sent to Netmundial on time were considered, and I tried to read them. Unfortunately, there was no position of the Russian Federation there. I had read the position of the Russian Federation, but it was confidential. I could not send it elsewhere, and I could not defend it. It was not made public. All the inputs were taken care of. Thank you, Mikhail. Let me explain this now. That conference did not have a set and fixed agenda. The agenda was improvised, and it was good that in the internet conference the agenda is improvised. Sometimes it's necessary. So the percent of the inputs taken care of and adopted is close to zero. The initial document did not actually include any comments and amendments. It was a draft consensus document, but you here understand what rough consensus really means. The rough consensus document, rough consensus is the definition created in ITF. And it basically means that the assembly selects a chair. So if they don't result in a consensus, the chairperson will come up with statement reflecting the main inputs, taking into account the main inputs. One person will do it, and the Russia's suggestion was making that document the chairperson's document, because it was not a consensus-based document, and it was not a rough consensus-based document. And my question, my following question, is regarding IANA transition period. NTIA needs to give some functions to IANA, and some of the IANA's functions would become much more transparent, accountable to the international community, which had not been so transparent, and you are quite aware of that fact. In my understanding,
To get there, we must identify and implement a function division model. We need to at least differentiate between IANA technical functions and polysemantic function of ICANN. Recently, the understanding that there is a need for such a model does not feature in ICANN's presentations. Instead, there are many proposals to organize seminars. Oh, so what do you think, Mikhail? Do you understand that ICANN's globalization runs contrary to the transition period expected result? Thank you, Igor. Well, first of all, I must confirm that everything that Igor has just mentioned were also noted by other delegations, not just the Russian delegation. Not everything perhaps was as perfect as the Brazilian organizers of this event wanted to see, but we had to deal with what we were dealt. I do not have the right to speak on behalf of ICANN to tell you anything about ICANN's position. ICANN has about 18 months, starting from March this year, to accumulate the opinions, and then approximately within 1 year we'll be able to say whether there is any consensus at all, and if yes, then what kind of consensus that is. As a person who has been working in the internet field for many years, I think that we should progress towards this aim, and if there were a position of the Russian government declared, I would have done everything possible to make sure that this position is heard by ICANN. But when we start arguing what is better, globalization or internationalization, what is better, cybersecurity or information security, we need to start with definitions. And what is the difference? Because Russia has always been traditionally been in favor of internationalization of internet governance. The recent documents, including the document of Netmundial, speak of globalization. But I have to give you a negative answer, Igor. I do not understand the difference between the two, between internationalization and globalization. Thank you very much. Dear audience, I wanted to point your attention to something. ID transition. We will have a presentation from RIPE NCC tomorrow because they will be collecting different opinions and points of view on transition and multi-stakeholderism and all that. And tomorrow we'll have a session on that. So anyone is invited. We would love to have someone from the ministry. We're not going to generate a final document. We're here only to collect different points of view. And as you have seen from the agenda, this conference is less technical and more regulatory governance. So please do not hesitate to use the microphones here, and please do not be shy to talk to the representatives of various international organizations present in the audience. Any other questions, please? If not, then wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you.